Okay, you guys, welcome. How are you guys doing? You're doing well? Okay, this is a big room. It's kind of spread out, but that's good, right? So you have a little bit of elbow room there. My name's Julieanne Kost, and I work for Adobe Systems. I've worked there since 1992. Please don't do the math. If you came to my session before, there will be the same jokes. Limited number of jokes available. So I imagine all of you are already using Lightroom since this is an advanced class. So what advanced means to all of you, I'm not sure. To me, it kind of means you know where all the tools are, but you might not know exactly how to use them all together. And I think the biggest difference is just jumping from using all of the local edits to the selective edits. So we're going to talk a lot about that. I do take photographs, but obviously my profession, since I work for Adobe, is to train in software. But my dad was an engineer and my mom was an artist. So I got the kind of geeky, techie side from my dad, which I think is really super helpful because he taught me that if you know your tools, then you can actually not focus on them, right? Like if you know your tools so well, if you master them, then you don't have to think about them. Some of you, I'm sure, have loaded film in the darkroom the first time you went in there and in the dark and tried to load the film on the spool. It was very difficult. As soon as you master it, you just go in there and do it. So that's the way I want you to all be. But I can't really say, like, I want you to be able to work with Lightroom in the dark, because that would be weird, all right? So with my mom being an artist and an illustrator, the thing that I took away from her that I think really affected my photography was that she started with nothing and then added things to her design, right? So there was never anything extraneous in my mom's design. She didn't just add something to add it. So for me in photography, that means that when I look at an image, the one thing that I want to do is I want to remove any distracting elements, anything that doesn't reinforce the narrative, anything that doesn't help tell the story, anything that takes my viewer to a different location in the image that I don't necessarily want them focusing on. So we'll talk a little bit about that today as well, but we really are going to focus on the tools. The other thing that I find when I do teach in a photo workshop situation or something is that I think one of the advantages that I had with my parents, because I got a camera early on, was just that I was a teenager and we would go to these national parks, and I can tell you the one thing I didn't want to do was take the same photo my parents did, right? And so I would always go, and when I go and photograph now, like if I'm going to spend a week somewhere, I will research it like no tomorrow. I will go look at all the photos that have been taken of the areas that I'm going to go to, because I want to make sure that I take a different photograph. Right? So when I arrive somewhere, I'll take the big scene, the kind of grab shot, but then I want to make sure that I take a lot of detailed shots. And you guys will just see that with the work that we're going to look at. So I actually want to take a look at some of these examples. So I'm just going to hop over to Lightroom. You guys all disappear now because I'm going to have to switch glasses, and I can only see about 1.5 feet in front of me. Ha-ha, only not ha-ha. All right, and let's take a look at these. So the other thing that if you're not a professional photographer, a lot of times, people come up to me and they're like, well, I took this picture and it looks terrible and everyone else is taking good pictures. Mine just come out looking blah on the camera. And it's like, yeah, a lot of times they will. I think that post-processing is at least half of the equation. Obviously, you have to capture the moment. You have to get the composition. You have to make sure that you get those things, a good exposure and everything. But if you know where you can take your images in post-process, I think you'll start viewing the world a little bit differently, because you'll say, I know I can photograph that. It's not going to look like that, but I can make it look like how I visualize it. So for example, there's the difference between, this is just adding a little bit of contrast to an image, right? Boring, much better. Okay? Some of you are like, it's still mud. No, it's beautiful. They're like angel's wings. But it is just mud. I'm just shooting the mud at my feet. That's all that is. Or an image like this, right? So just popping it, adding a little bit of saturation. Not so much saturation that your eyes bleed. Just a little bit of saturation. I know, some of you think, I paid for the slider. I'm going to use it. Ha! My color palette is more near doom and gloom, so I tend to go left, whereas you guys will go right. Okay? An image like this, we can turn it into this with just a few quick edits. Selective edits, though. It's not global, right? Again, here, I'm certainly going to take that photograph, even though it's an overcast day, because I can always add contrast. And we know it's easier to add contrast, of course, than to take it away. Or an image like this, that's not like a composite. When I exposed this image, I wanted to expose it as bright as possible, but not clip the highlights, right? Because we know when we clip the highlights in an image, we're not going to be able to bring them back. We can't recover what's not there, but we can recover what is there. And the reason I say that you want to get as close to overexposing as possible, but not overexpose, is because the way that the cameras capture information, there's so much information in that highlight area to recover that you want to go ahead and make sure that you get up to the right side of that histogram when you're photographing, because otherwise if you're in the middle of the histogram and you have to bring everything up in post, if you have to increase your exposure in post, what does that do to your shadows? Well, they were probably noisier. And so when you add light into those shadows, you might be introducing noise that you could avoid if you just made sure that the exposure was proper on capture. An image like this, like no big deal, right? You're just looking at rocks. But in my mind, when I saw that, I was like, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those, right? So that's what it, technically, that's what the camera saw, but I'll tell you that's not what it looked like. That's what it looked like, at least to me. And by the way, in Iceland, it is like that. It's crazy saturated moss green. All right, or like this. I just think it makes it a more interesting image. Enhance the red, that's what I saw when I was there. Decrease the shadows around it. Or bubbling mud, you got a little dehaze, right? So a little dehaze action, really easy. And we're gonna walk through how to do these. Sometimes the images, you know, I'm trying to look at them in grayscale. I'm trying to envision that as I take it. I think that's a huge advantage if you learned with black and white photography, because you have to look at the world differently, or at least your mind is kind of mentally converting colors into different values. So I'd strongly recommend that you work with black and white a little bit. And sometimes, you know, it just takes a little bit of pop and contrast, but I'll also say this is an HDR image. So this is a high contrast scene. It's in the middle of the day, and there's no way I would have captured that in a single exposure. It took 3 exposures to get that, and then I was able to lift those shadows so we could see into it. And then we can do creative things too, right? We can desaturate some colors and not others, right? If that's what we're trying to accomplish, because that water is crazy blue. And then today, it's not really just all about kind of traditional, like this is the proper way to expose it. I really highly encourage you to experiment. And if someone turns up their nose, just who cares? Know whose opinion matters to you, all right? And here we go with just another selective adjustment. And one more, we'll walk through that one. But here's the other thing that I want to mention. Lightroom is fantastic. I love it. I do about 80% of my work in it, but I still go to Photoshop for that 20%. So if that's my original, and Lightroom can do that, so it's just, because you know, not all images need a lot of manipulation, but when I'm trying to retouch things, like those little pieces of ice in the water, that's when I'll go to Photoshop, right? This one looks much better in Lightroom. So there's the original, there's Lightroom, but there's Photoshop, just removing a little bit of those distracting elements in the image. All right, or in this one, there's the original, there's Lightroom, and there's Photoshop. Does it take me 20 minutes to go in there and use my Wacom tablet in Photoshop to remove all those little bits there? Yeah, but do I think it's a better image? Yes. Do I think it's worth it? Yes. Will you think it's worth it? I think it depends. It depends on what your client is paying you. It depends on if you're doing the work for yourself. It depends on where it's going to be shown. If you're going to do it to social media, you might not want to spend 20 minutes in Photoshop because no one might notice as they're sitting in the middle of the grocery store flipping through your images at 90 miles an hour. So you have to make that decision. Here, again, there's the original. There it is in Lightroom. And there it is in Photoshop. Just doing subtle things like, you know, getting rid of the garbage sitting by that hut, or getting rid of the little houses in the background. I'm not a photojournalist, so for me, everything is fair. And then opening up that river, so you've got that nice kind of line going on that leads you right into that, that old house. All right, or here, this is an aerial shot, right? So we can do a lot in Lightroom, but we can't get rid of that big spot in the upper right. So again, that's for Photoshop, right? Again, just removing those distracting elements. So that's in Photoshop. So I just wanted to show that it is important still. People always ask me, you know, when do you go to Photoshop? Either when it's easier to select and make my changes, right? Because in Lightroom, you've got the paintbrush, but there's no lasso and there's no like easy, quick ways to select things. But Photoshop has a ton of those things. So I'll go to Photoshop for that. And then again here, just removing some of those little places there where I filled in the foliage, and then down at the bottom where I've got that little plant. And here again, here's a good example that goes to Photoshop, right? So there's Lightroom, but there's Photoshop. Why? Because I'm not going to paint that one little piece of gray area at a time. I'm going to take it in Photoshop, use the selection tools there, and then select inverse and darken down the background. Okay. There again, just getting rid of those distracting elements. So that to me is what it's all about. Now something like this, you actually have to make up information, right? So again, that's when I'd go to Photoshop to fill in that top area. That's just a quick copy of the area below the blue, pasting it in at a lower opacity, and then cleaning up all those little details. You know, so many times you get to an image like this, and you're like, well, I'm not going to take that picture because even after Lightroom, look at that messy sand down there, right? Well, take another picture where people haven't walked, and then just replace that sand. So you get this nice kind of graphic image. I can imagine if you're a designer, you're like, you don't want to put text over that, but you could put it over that. Right? So I'm looking for areas, and you, as if you're shooting for design, you know you're going to have text somewhere, or you're going to overlap it, or put it in a circle, or whatever you're going to do. So just don't miss the image, I guess. Like if you've got a boring sky there, and you want to enhance it, just think later on I can take a picture of the sky, and I can go ahead and pop that in. All right? Or if the beach is really dirty, we can just clean that up, right? Just take another picture of the beach from the same angle. It's really helpful if you do two things. One, capture an image with the same direction of light, right? So the light is coming in the same direction, and it also has the same quality of light, and it's going to make your composites much easier when you're retouching your images. So here, for example, I don't want to miss that piece of ice. That's cool, right? So I just take another picture that's pure water, and that way I can use that water over all those other icicles right there to make that composite. Okay? Again here, I might get the image of the icebergs, great, but I just need more water. So I'll take a few more images of just the water with maybe these other pieces of ice, same quality of light, same direction of light, and then we can go ahead and put them together if we don't want to see the rocks there. Okay, or this geyser, or as they say in Iceland, the geyser, which I think is really funny. I'm going to photograph the geysers. That doesn't sound very polite. All right, so we go here, there's nowhere to go. It's a 360, right? People stand all the way around. So you just take a few additional pictures of when it's kind of misty and also when there's no bubbling water, and you just put them together, and it's a much more interesting image. All right, okay, so that's enough about that. Let's get started and take a look at how we can make some of these enhancements. Are we good? Does this sound interesting? Okay, all right. Let's do it. So we're going to go to the Develop module. Just a few things here. You guys probably know if you right-click on any of these panels, you can actually choose to go to solo mode, right? So solo mode only allows you to have one panel open at a time, so that if I turn that off, right, and then all of a sudden I've got all these panels, especially on a laptop, you don't have to sit there and scroll through, back up, back down all the time. If you just right-click and you choose, whoops, not show all, right-click and do solo mode, now I can only have one panel open at a time, so it will close the other panels as I'm working. That's quite convenient. If you ever make changes to a slider, you can double-click on a single slider in order to change it, or if you've got multiple sliders, see these little boxes here? So double-clicking white balance would reset both of those. If we come down here to tone, and we've got a bunch of changes, double-clicking the word tone will reset all of those sliders. All right, and then also, if you happen to use these sliders in a different order, you can right-click and say customize the develop panel, and you can go in there and you can just drag and reorder these however you use these different panels. In fact, you can even turn off panels that you don't want. But that would take a restart, and I don't want to take time for that, so I'll just say cancel and back out of there. Okay, so there's three things that I always do to an image, and so I just set my default so that when I import my files, it does it for me automatically. It's different from a preset. A preset is something you apply after you import. This just sets the default rendering in Lightroom for this camera. I would have to do it for every camera, but let me show you how to do that in case you want to. Hit reset because everything is going to be captured. So if you have a crop on your image or a tone curve or anything, everything that is saved when you save a new default is captured. So zero everything out by hitting reset, and then I go down here into lens correction. I would enable remove chromatic aberration and enable lens profile corrections. So that means that misalignment of pixels along the edges, you kind of get that red to cyan look sometimes. It will automatically fix that, and it will also, if you have like a wider angle lens and you're getting lens distortion, it will correct that and take off the vignetting. I want that on like 99% of my images. So I want that to be my default setting. So I would enable both of those. And then I also go to the basic panel because here's where I can make changes to things like my profile, right? So I imagine that most of you are shooting in RAW, and something has to make the raw file, right? It's just a bunch of ones and zeros. Something has to make it into a visible photograph for you to see. And the baseline for that is your profile. So your profile, think of it as like your film stock, right? It is just the default settings. You can always change it. It's non-destructive. You can also make creative effects with profiles. And there are creative profiles that you can apply to non-RAW files, like your TIFF files and your JPEGs. Ooh, that was loud. But for right now, we're just going to set the profile here to landscape. Now, I'll click auto because this is very dark and I want you to see the difference here. But the default that Adobe sets is Adobe Color, which is a great generic starting point, right? Now, if you want the ultimate control over your image, the tonality and everything, you can go down to neutral. That's going to be the flattest image. That's starting with a very flat image, no tone curve, no increased saturation, nothing. Flat image. If that's what you want, start with neutral. If you want a little bit of a tone curve in there, now don't get confused. I'm not talking about actually moving the tone curve. Like when you pick a profile, none of your sliders move. They're independent. This is setting your baseline, and then you still have all the sliders that you can move around, okay? If you're doing landscape, you might want to look at the landscape profile. It's going to compress your shadows and your highlights because we imagine that most of the time when you're shooting, it's outdoors, you don't have control over the light, it's a high contrast scene, so we're compressing those so that you get detail in the shadow and highlight area. It also adds a little bit of saturation, and the saturation goes over the entire image, so it's not a good profile for portraits. Let me just show you an example very quickly. I'll come right here, there's a portrait. Oh, she looks so happy. If we go to landscape, all of a sudden I've been in the sun all day. Okay, we probably don't want that because it's adding that pop that most landscape photographers want. Instead, I would go to neutral. Now I've got more realistic flesh tones. If we come down here to vivid, vivid's kind of this hybrid. Well, you'll notice I got that pop in the greens behind me, but I didn't get the pop in the flesh tone. So if you're doing environmental portraiture where you've got people in a landscape, you might want to start off with vivid. I think people shy away from it because they're like, oh, I don't want it too vivid. It's like, no, it's actually a really good combo. Okay. Let's go back to that other image we were working on right here. Okay. So I just clicked auto. I know for the last, 10 years we've been telling you not to click auto, but auto's gotten much better with the whole Sensei thing and the machine learning, and we've got Adobe stock, so we're training it with literally millions of images. So auto has gotten better, but it's up to you. If you want to try it, just tap it. If you don't like it, just double click on tone. That will reset all of these sliders. If you only want a portion of auto, hold down the Shift key and double click, for example, on my whites, and that will set the dynamic range of the image so that it goes all the way to the right side of the histogram. You can do the same thing. You can Shift, double click on the blacks. It's not going to move it very much here because there is so much dark area in the image. You can also just click anywhere in your histogram if you want to. Like if I wanted to move my shadows up, I can just click and drag and it will move the shadow slider for me. Or if I hover over here on the right side of my histogram, I can click and drag down and it would take down my highlight slider. So feel free to just drag right in the histogram, especially if you have a different panel open and you just want to make a slight adjustment. All right, so I'm going to leave my shadows taken all the way up and my highlights down. And I might take the exposure up just a little bit on this image here, but that's probably all I want to do. I can see when I did that, I'm taking the highlights too hot. If I tap the J key, J is for just show me the stuff that's clipped. I don't know why it's J. It's J for Julieanne, all right? But then you could come down here and you could say, well, I don't want my whites that hot. I don't want my whites blowing out. I can't have them clipped, so I'll pull that back down. And look, I was going to say I don't care what order you do these in, but I do care deeply. But I don't. You can do them in any order you want, and you can go back and fine-tune them. There is no right or wrong way to do that. All right, so with this image, actually, I want to crop it as well, so I'll tap, what will we tap? The R key for crop, because it's great, all right? And then we will tap the X key because I actually want it to be not a horizontal but a vertical image instead. And I'm going to change my aspect ratio right over here. And I'm just going to change this maybe to 4:6. No, silly girl. What did I want? 4:5. There we go. Now let's bring this down and then just kind of bring that up a smidge like that. Now you'll notice that, see, I have an overlay when I'm dragging, but my overlay disappears when my mouse is up. And that's because I've gone to Tools, Tool Overlay, and changed it from Always Show to Auto Show. All right? You can also choose what you want it to show. Do you want a grid? Do you want rule of thirds? Or any of these different options here? Totally up to you. All right, so I'll tap Enter Return to apply that. If I don't like it, of course, we just tap R again and we say, whoops, we need to scoot that over, or do whatever you need to do. Tap Return or Enter. It's always non-destructive. Okay, so actually on this image, this is probably all I would do globally. Now I'm going to go in with all of my local adjustment tools, right? So they're all up in the toolbar up here. I'll start just with the adjustment brush. If I've got a bunch of sliders already set in here and I want to reset them all at once, I can just double click on the word effect. And there's kind of two schools of thought here, and so we allow you to do it either way or a mix of whichever way you want. You can reset them all to nothing and then just start painting. So I'll use the right bracket key here, and I've got my flow set up really high, which means it's going to put down 100% of whatever effect I'm going to give it in a minute. I've seen people with literally 300 pins in an image, and if you want to bring Lightroom to its knees, put 300 pins in your image. Instead, you could say, hey, I want to dodge or burn an area or make lighter or darker, so I want to dodge the rocks. And I could say, you know, the maximum probability that I'm going to dodge is maybe like two stops. But if I just paint right now, it's going to paint that whole 2 stops in one paint stroke. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to bring the flow down. All right, so now I can go ahead and just make a few different marks here. And if I had my history, you could actually see it's slowly building up the dodge in here. And then I could come over here and I could slowly build that up, and I could be getting a smaller tool to go in here. So if I tap the O key, that's the overlay in red of what I've done. Tap the O key again and it goes away. So I can come down here. And do you see how I don't have to make all those different pins, but I'm lightening different areas with different amounts just by using that reduced flow slider. So I highly recommend that you check that out. I'll come over here and just dodge a little bit more up here, maybe a little over here and a little bit down here. All right, now the water. I like the water, but I want to add a little bit of contrast in there. So that's why I didn't add clarity or texture to the whole image right off the bat. I knew that I wanted to draw attention to certain areas in the image, so I'm going to apply it locally or selectively. So I just click New, where it says New up here. I'll choose to double click where it says Effect, just to reset that. And this time I'm going to bring up the clarity. So you don't have to preload the tool, right? I could leave this set to everything being zeroed out, and then I could just paint, right? So if I tap the O key, I could go in here and say, all right, well, let's tap the 7 or 8 key and get like 70% or so. And now I'm going to paint. Let's just paint in here and paint over here and paint down here. And nothing's actually happening. That red is the mask that I've showed by tapping the O key, right? If I tap O again, it's going to hide the mask. But that will just allow me to do my painting. And then I could come in and say, all right, well, how much clarity do I want? And you can see it's darkening it, but not enough. So I might decrease the exposure slider just a little bit in that area, and then play with the clarity again. So, you know, we added this texture slider, which I'm going to show in a minute, but just know, as an FYI, there's a big difference. Think of it like this, like if you want to enhance the absolute smallest details in your image, use sharpening. Use the detail slider in sharpening. That's going to be your finest areas in your image. If you want to go one step larger in the high frequency areas of your image, then you're going to use texture, and it's going to go into small areas and add contrast to fool your eye into thinking that your image is sharper. Then you step back a step further, and that's clarity. Clarity isn't going to affect the whole image. It's going to look in the midtones of your image. It's going to find edges, and on one side of the edge it's going to make it darker, and on the other side of the edge it's going to make it lighter, but it's a wider radius. If you've ever used unsharp mask in Photoshop, you know there's like a amount slider. That's the amount of contrast. That's how much we would pull our sliders in Lightroom. Then there's a radius slider. And the radius slider I think of is like, that's more when I go down to my brain stop working for a moment there, to my clarity instead of my texture. Wow, that synapse just didn't fire in time to give me the words I needed. Okay, so then bigger than that, or I shouldn't say bigger than that because it's a little bit different. Yeah, okay, so dehaze really is for that. It's for cutting through atmospheric effects, right? So if you've got something, I've got some mud later on, I can show you, using dehaze is really going to cut through that haze. It's going to add saturation, and the reason that it does that is because usually smog and haze desaturates, and so we add back in that saturation. But if you're just doing it like on an image like this, where you want to add dehaze to the waterfall, be careful. Do you see that blue that it's adding there? It's adding a little bit of a blue color cast, so be careful if you're using it in a situation like this. Now, what if I do want to add color? If I want to add color to this, well, let's add another new pin. I'll scroll back up, hit new, just make sure everything's zeroed out, and then use a little bit larger of a brush. What am I set to? About 70 in my flow, and I'm just going to paint right down here and maybe over in here. Nothing's happening right now because none of the settings have been set. I could go in and just try to play with temperature and tint, or I can come down here to where it says color and just add like a little color overlay. Okay, that's a little bit too much, but maybe just make it pretty subtle right there. Close that up. And then probably I'd want to scoot on down all the way to my effects and just add a little bit of a darkening around the edges using a vignette. I prefer the color priority. Most of the time it's a little bit softer, a little bit more subtle. And now if we just tap the backslash key, we've gone from before to after. So while we made some local adjustments, while we made some global adjustments, I think what really makes the difference between a beginner and advanced is going into those selective adjustments and focusing on where you want the viewer to look, what's important in the image, okay? All right, so this next one is pretty darn simple, and I'm not going to continually go back through, but you should know, I mean, my workflow is, oh, I went through that and I never showed you how to set the default settings, did I? Sorry. So let's do that. Let's reset this. We'll make sure this one's reset. We'll go to down here to our lens correction, make sure that both of those are on, come up here to basic, make sure it's on landscape. Now, if from now on, whenever I import files into Lightroom and I want those three things applied, my lens correction, chromatic aberration enabled, and the profile set to Adobe Landscape, all I need to do is go here to Develop and go to Set Default Settings. Brings up a dialog box. I would say Update to Current Settings. It does say that the changes are not undoable, but so what that means is you can't use Command Z to undo it. All right, so I'm just going to say, yeah, update to that. So from now on, it won't touch any of my legacy files. It won't go back in and change anything you've already done. It's just from now on, with this camera, it's going to use those default settings. So you would need to do this for each different camera make and model. You can even go into the preferences here, into your presets, and actually say, make it specific to a camera serial number, if you have two of the same camera models, and also to the ISO setting of the image. So for example, if you didn't like the amount of noise reduction we do, you can go ahead and change that. All right, so with this next image, I really want to enhance the rocks here. So I could do it one of two ways. The easiest way for me to think about it is I'm just going to darken down the background and then come back in and bring up the foreground, right? So there's that really annoying thing right there. But I don't want to crop the image, because if I crop that out, the rocks are going to be too low, right? So I could crop, oops, ugh, geez. You guys have done that before, I know. You tap the C key for crop and you go to compare mode. R for crop, right? I know it's only been years. I'll learn someday. Old dog, new tricks. Very difficult. So I want to crop it like this so that these rocks are actually more centered, but then I get this area up here. So that's kind of a bummer. So I just want to fill it in. Now it's up to you if you're going to go to Photoshop to do this, but look, we've got the healing brush right here, and you can heal and you can clone. So cloning will give you the exact same thing, so it'll take one area and just duplicate it. I want to go ahead and make sure this is set to heal. It's got a, well, let's add a little bit of a feather on there, and we can click a spot, but it's probably going to be easier for me if I click and drag over that whole area there. Nice. All right, so let's do a little H for hide. So here we can see now where it's taking the information from. Of course, we can reposition that. If we wanted that to be more mossy there, we could do that. I think it actually did a better job of picking a source point for me than what I'm doing. So I would probably go with, that looks all right. Tap return and apply that. All right, I'll go with that. How come I can see a little bit of the, can you see that? I'm going to go to a different image and go back. Oh, because it was showing me the pin. I was seeing the little bit of the pin there because I had forgotten that I hadn't hid it. So it's hidden. All right, let's tap return, and that will go ahead and put back the tool. All right, so now we need to make some adjustments here. Let's go ahead and change the white balance. I am really going to bring that white balance up. Yep, right about there. I can probably take off a little bit of this, maybe put it down to 10. A lot of times I find that when I'm using the tablet, sometimes it's hard for me to get right to the slider where I want it. So a lot of times it's easier for me just to highlight the numeric value and then just use my arrow keys going up and down. If you hold the shift key, you can go up and down in larger increments. So up to you. I'll put it down somewhere, maybe 12 will be fine. All right, then I want to take down the exposure of the whole scene, so I'm going to make it pretty dark. I probably want to add a little bit of clarity, right? We can see how that's wider. It's giving a little bit more just oomph to it. But now I need to go ahead and paint in those other areas, right? So I'm going to change to my selective tools. I'm going to grab that brush again. I'm going to go ahead and make some changes here. Let's go ahead and bring up, so I brought the whole exposure down like a stop. Let's see what I did. I brought it down a little bit over a stop, and that's looking pretty dark to me. So when I grab my adjustment brush, let's bring it back up. We've got to bring it back up at least a stop, probably more than that, maybe 1.5 stops. I'll bring my flow down a little bit and really decrease the saturation as well, because I want to get the saturation out of there. Using that left bracket, I'll get a smaller brush, and now we can go ahead and start painting in all of those areas where we want to see that. Right, so we're just trying to make it stand out. Are you getting the feeling that that's cheating? She's cheating, it didn't look like that. Looked like that to me. Huh, that's what I think. All right, shall we make this faster? Let's tap 0. I'm gonna go all the way up to 100%. And we're just gonna paint really quick here. Oof, oof, that's a lot. So you see why now I usually don't have my flow set to 100%? Because when it's at 100% and you paint, it just does it all in one. Right? So a lot of times it's too heavy-handed, but I'll just go over here and come down here because we know that our eye is going to go to the lightest points in the image. If we paint too much, we can just hold down the Option key. That's going to switch to the eraser tool, so we could take it out of there, go back in and paint, 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 paint. Oh, this is so boring watching her paint. Okay, I think we got the idea. You don't have to do all 5 of them. Oh, but I do. I do. All right, and then one last thing, because I don't want your eye to go off the edge of the image, right? We're going to come right down here. We're going to tap return once, return twice. That closes the tool, puts it back. Scroll down here. We're going to come down to effects and just really small little color priority, just a smidge. And then we just do the backslash key. So before and after, right? So it's kind of funny because a lot of times when you're doing it, it's, okay, so that might have been a little overdone, but oh my goodness, up there it's really, okay. Oh, wow. So how are your, I bet that's never happened to you, right? Everything that you've ever seen on your monitor looks the same on every other monitor, and after it's been printed and when it's on social media, it always looks the same. Okay, I'm sorry, please. I didn't mean to make your eyes bleed there. Let's just bring our color temperature. Oh, okay, hard to do that while I'm doing this, but all right. I think you guys get the idea, yes? All right. Oh, don't give her anything with color in it. All right, so let's take a look at a few more of these selective tools, because really we've only used the brush tool. So how about that linear gradient? Well, again, because I have that default settings, you know, I don't have to come down here and go to lens correction and then set my profile here. It's already set for me. So I could click auto and see how that does. Nah, not as much as I want. I really need those shadows to come up. I really want those highlights to be down. And you might be thinking, oh my goodness, wow. Let's get rid of some of that vibrance. Well, that's kind of ironic because I was going to make that more vibrant, but that's just not going to happen. Sorry, but it's not radioactive in Iceland. You can still go there. It'll be fine. All right. And the sky really isn't showing up, but I really crank my shadows up because I know I'm going to have to take my exposure down, right, to get some of that information in the sky. So I can go down to about there, but that's about it as far as what I can see. Now I'm going to have to go to my selective adjustments. So the problem is, right, when you grab either the linear or the radial gradient and you say, all right, I just want to decrease the exposure a smidge, and I want to increase maybe my dehaze a bit, and maybe I'll probably have to decrease my saturation, so those are kind of guesses, but then you would drag down from the top of your image, and now you get those clouds, right? But you also get the top of the mountain, right? So there is a brush, not the same brush as the adjustment brush, but look at when I've got either one of these tools selected, it says New, Edit, and Brush. So if I tap the O key, we can see, if I drag this down even further, just for the example here, we can see that the overlay is happening in the top of those mountains, right? So I'll tap O again, and then I'm going to grab this brush, but I don't want to paint with it, because that would add more of the adjustment. I need to erase with it, so I'll click on the eraser. I'll bring the flow down a bit. I might add a little bit more of a feather on that brush. And now I can just paint up in the mountain area here up at the top, and I'm removing the adjustment. And if I paint again, because I've got that lower flow, every time I release my cursor and I keep painting here, it's going to keep making that adjustment. All right? So both of those tools become infinitely more valuable when you don't have to apply them to the whole area that you drag them over. All right? I might want to do another one, so I'll click New. This time I'll just drag up from the bottom here just to keep our eye in there, but I don't want the dehaze or the saturation, so I'll double click on those. The exposure here, probably not a half a stop, maybe just about 2.2 of a stop, just to darken it down a little. Do you think it's getting, I think it's getting a little muddy. So a lot of times when I use these tools, I'll want to go in and just change the temperature or the tint a little bit. And in this case, I just want to increase the temperature, which is going to just make that a little bit warmer, a little bit more yellow down there, so you can't tell that I've just darkened it down with a little bit of an exposure burn. All right? Now, I was planning on making the green a little bit more saturated, but perhaps that's not the best idea for this image. Okay, I know what I'll do. Oh, this will be great. So, see how there's the green against the black volcano, which looks good, and well, I'll show you where, right up here, right? So all this looks good, and this looks good, right? Let's say I want to desaturate this because I want to draw your eye to this. So I don't want to sit here, well, I can't use HSL, right? Because if I use HSL and I go in and say, all right, well, I want to pick my greens, so maybe I would say, in HSL, I'll pick my targeted adjustment tool, I'll make sure it's set to saturation here, and then I'll click and drag down. That's going to do everything, right? It's going to do the greens throughout the image because this is a global adjustment. So then you start thinking, oh my goodness, so you're telling me I have to pick up my paint brush and then I have to go in and zoom and paint over all of the green and not touch any of the rocks? Nay, nay. Let me double click to reset this and I'll just paint, and let's just bring the flows up to 100%. I'm going to tap O so you can see where I'm painting. All right, so I'm going to paint over all of this. All of that and all of that, all of this green. But Julieanne, you're also painting over stuff that's not green. I know. She must be lazy. No, she's not. Watch this. Let's paint over there. Okay, let's hide that. Tap O again. And let's, in this case, I'm going to decrease the saturation. So let's see how it looks up there. All right, so it's decreasing the saturation everywhere, right? It's spilling all over those rocks. So I'll keep it down to let's keep it down to negative 100%. Scroll down in that panel, and there's something called range mask. Now, range mask allows you to mask within your paint stroke. So I painted this area, so it's saying, take that mask, and within that area that I've painted, do something. And I can range mask based on either color or luminosity. So if I choose luminosity, I can come in here and say, oh, I only want to affect my highlights, or I only want to affect my shadows, or maybe there's some kind of midtone that I want to make an adjustment to, and it makes the mask for me. If I choose color, then I can grab this eyedropper right here and just click and drag over the color of that moss. And did you see all of a sudden, all the dirt now doesn't have that desaturated effect to it? Let me do it again. I will undo, and then dragging over the moss, it tightens the mask to only those green values that I just selected. Now I think that looks a little bit silly, desaturated all the way, but let me look at this screen and we could just maybe desaturate it. Well, you get the idea, maybe to there. I still like it pretty saturated, but still that's minus 36. We could change the color of it if you want to. Obviously we can stack as many of these as we want. We could take it a little more towards green, or we could go ahead and warm it up a little bit. And if we want to see that mask, we can actually hold down the Option key and click on this amount slider, and we can make it a softer edge mask, or we can make it a tighter, harder edge mask if we really want it to just clip. So let's look at that. Let's take that all the way down again, that saturation, so we can see it. Just scoot up here, saturation all the way down, right? So with the amount slider down here, it's a very tight, hard edge mask. When I move the amount slider over to the right, I'm not sure if you can see that from where you're sitting, but it gets a little bit softer. We start seeing a little bit of green, almost like we need to decontaminate that area. So I'm gonna go with a tighter mask there, and then we'll just bring back up that saturation a bit, okay? And then there's also the radial gradient. I would say, you know, this image is kind of missing the key component, which would be like the actor on the stage. So if I was going to take this to Photoshop and I wanted to highlight an area, I might just drag out a radial gradient. I could be like, let's set a spaceship down there or something. You get the idea. I can just make out a radial gradient, any size I want to, and then we could go ahead and start playing with exposure, and we could darken that down or lighten it up. But by default, it's affecting what's outside of it. I want it to affect what's inside of it. So there's a little invert box right here. You just tap invert, and then we can increase the exposure there, and we can make that wider, and we can go ahead and use the little feather if we needed to make it just a sharp edge circle, or we could feather that out quite a bit. Hit return and return again, and that will put the tool back. So anyway, if I do the little backslash key, we've got a little before and after there. That's not really the before. So let me show you something. That's the after, and that's what I like. But the before, do you guys ever do this? Like you want to compare, so you go maybe you tap the Y key. So now I've got before and after on the left and right. But what's on the before isn't really the before. It's whatever state I imported it into. And so if you're an educator or something, you're constantly re-importing files and making changes to them. Do you know that you can grab from history any state and drag it into the before state? So if I just come down here, I could just be like, hey, where did I ever reset this image? No, see, I created, yep, reset settings. Boom, I just dragged that over. I said, boom, okay, I just dragged that over. So you can drag from any state in history to see your before and after. So this is kind of opposite from what I imagine you guys would probably do. You guys might get to a point where you're like, hey, I really like this image here, but I actually want to see it in grayscale. So you tap the V key, V for black and white. You know, the last name of Kost, I can do that joke. All right, so I'm like, oh, well, I like that in grayscale. So we get out of our little before and after, we tap Y, and we're like, okay, well, let's compare color with grayscale. And you're like, oh, it went to the before state, right? So go back to Y. Y is just this little icon right here, right, before and after, and say, hey, I want to view the color one and the black and white one, and just drag the retouched color version to your before. Then you can go full screen and do the little backspace key to go before and after, which will show you the color version and the black and white version. You could also take snapshots, right? So look, I have a whole bunch of snapshots here that walk me through the entire process that I just did. So all you have to do, if you get to a point where you really like this, but you want to head into another direction, just click on the snapshot here. Actually, let's go to the black and white one because I'm in the before state. So let's go to the after state. Click here to add another snapshot, and this will be my black and white snapshot. So now I can quickly say, hey, art director, do you like this one or do you like this one? And they say, oh, definitely, we're definitely going to go with the black and white one. And you go, you're an art director, there's no such thing as definitely. All right? So then later on, when you have to take this into Photoshop to do work to it, you don't just edit in Photoshop, right? You go here and you say, well, I'm going to edit in, but I'm going to open that as a smart object in Photoshop because I'm a smart person. I want to work with smart objects. So what that does is it will launch Photoshop, and Lightroom's going to hand off a copy of this file. So it has now made a copy of it, and it's bringing it to Photoshop, and it's going to put it inside your TIFF or your PSD file as a full-on raw file. So if you think of TIFF or Photoshop as just a candy wrapper, you've just put a raw file in your candy wrapper. All right, so it's going to read that and then open it up. There it is. And then you add text and you do masking and you do your whole layout and you spend like 2 hours doing whatever it is you do. And then the art director says, ooh, sorry, I forgot. I want that in color. And you're like, no. And you're like, I don't care, because it's a smart object. You double click on the smart object, it brings it up in RAW, right, in the Camera Raw dialog box. And you're smart because you save the snapshot. So you can just come over here and hit, if I can hit it, hit snapshot and say, oh, I'm sorry, did you want the color version of that? There you go. You click OK, it updates it. You've got all your masks, your text, all your other components in there, and you're done. So that's the advantage of using your snapshots in Lightroom. The other thing that people do, though, is sometimes they just want a virtual copy, because they might want to print the same image next to each other. They might want Lightroom to treat it as if there are 2 photos. So you could just use Command and then, well, it's Command and then apostrophe, but it's here, I think under, there we go, under Photo, see right here? So then create virtual copy. So now if you look at my film strip, I had one, what? Okay, did you notice that I read that? It was a message. It was important. It was trying to tell me something. It was trying to help me, not hurt myself, so I read it. Okay. Now, snapshots are carried throughout virtual copies. So if I change this right now back to the color one, if we look in my film strip, look, I've got 2 thumbnails for one original file on my hard drive. So now I can have multiple versions. If I go to the grid view, we can see both of those. I can put them in different collections. I could print them both as separate files. So that's the difference between the virtual copies and the snapshots. All right, let's move on to this image. Tap the D key. We'll go into the Develop module again. All right, so we've got a bunch of blue water here. I'm going to go back and just quit Photoshop. We don't need that. I'm going to release all that. Give me the RAM in Lightroom. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make some quick changes here. I'd probably just go ahead and maybe make this a little bit bluer by bringing down the white balance. It's, of course, very, very dark there. We could click Auto, see what Auto does. It's doing okay, but not enough, right? So I probably want to add a little bit of exposure here. Let's just brighten that up. But if I do that, I better really bring down those highlights. And see, this is what you get into. You get into a situation where you're like, okay, I can't do both. I can't go far enough. I can bring the shadows up further, but then if I bring the exposure down, I'm just not getting the information in the water. But I know I have the information because I look at my histogram and it's like, it's there. So that's when I have to break and say, I can't do it globally. I have to do it selectively. So I treat these 2 areas as separate. I come in here and I say, all right, well, the first thing I want to do is just do a little bit of dodging. So let's bring up the exposure and maybe bring up the shadows all the way. I'll leave it set to 100%. I've got a small brush. Let's just come in here. And whoops, I moved the pin. Let's just paint over here. That's not enough exposure, so let's just brighten it up even more. What's my flow set to? All right, we're all right. Let's just paint a little bit more and then come over here. All right, I went a little too far there, so I could take that off if I want to, but okay. Then I'm going to make another new one, right? And on this one, let's reset it. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of, because this color just does not work for me. All right, so I'm going to desaturate that, because the emphasis here, I want to be on that blue water. So I'll get a much bigger brush, and then just quickly, for the sake of time here, I'm going to paint with 100% desaturation. Tap the O key. All right. What am I doing? Am I crazy? Saturation's negative 100. Flow is up. Ugh, look at that. This is a learning moment for all of us. For those of you who were feeling uncomfortable for me, you may now breathe. It's okay. So, someone might have been wondering, Julieanne, what does that density slider do? It caps out what you can affect. So it takes everything up here and says, yeah, but even if you're painting at 100%, you only get 20% of whatever your option is here. It limits what you can do. All right? Dee, 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 dee. And then we go, thank you very much. Let's just paint that out. All right, probably don't want it a negative 100 actually after all. Probably want to get a smaller brush. You guys would take more time because you're professionals. And then we'd say, all right, not quite that much. Let's bring in just a little bit of that color back. Whew. All right, then we need to work on the water, so we scroll back up. Let me make my thumbnails a little bit smaller so that we don't have to keep doing all that scrolling. And in fact, we could hide those, but I'll leave them up for now. And then say we want another new one right here. And let's just double click. And what do we want to do with this? Definitely a dehaze move here. So bigger brush and paint on over. Woo, look at that saturation. Holy moly. That's a lot of saturation. Oh, I can't imagine what it looks like for you guys. Yeah, that is, wow. Okay, so dehaze always adds saturation, right? So we're going to bring our saturation down here. Oh, much better, more relaxing. Oh, for you guys, oh my goodness, we're bringing it almost all the way down there. Oh, look. Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, so, all right, that's okay. Let's go back up with clarity here. That's going to bring that down a little bit, added the clarity, and then let's go ahead and bring down the saturation even more up there. And then I'm going to return to the pin down here, right? Because when I brought that saturation up, I don't think it's looking good there. Let's bring that on down. And then look at, I can see up there what I can't see on my screen, which is I need to continue to take out more saturation on these rocks. And here, and then down over there, and maybe right there. Well, this is a good way to edit. All right, how about right about like that? Okay, you with me with that? So we just do a quick little before and after. So huge change. So don't throw these files away if they look like this. You've got the information in your highlights. You've got the information in the shadows. You can selectively go in and make these changes. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this new texture slider. I'm going to skip that other, well, no, because this is interesting. Sorry, but they're all good. It's all good. All right, 145, and we have plenty of time. So in this image right here, this is a high dynamic range image. I think I mentioned that before. I took 3 exposures and then selected the 3 exposures and ran the photo merge. That combined the 3 exposures. It's still a raw file, so I get all the raw goodness, but I have much more information to work with. It also means that the image that I underexposed is going to have better information in the highlights, and the image that I overexposed is going to have better information in the shadows, meaning less noise in those shadows. So I can draw from that. And you'll notice that when I go to my exposure slider this time, I'm in the tool, sorry. When I go to my exposure slider this time and I go down, look at it, it goes to -10. And it goes to +10. I have a huge dynamic range here. If we go to any other image that is not HDR, I click on that, then when I move my exposure slider down, it's only going to go to -5 and +5. I don't have nearly the amount of information to work with. So let's go back here. Excellent. Now I'm going to take my highlights down to try to get some of that water. I'm going to take my shadows way up. I'm going to come in here with my whites. I'm going to look at the histogram as I start sliding that over, just to make sure I'm using the full dynamic range there. Okay. Then if I needed to go further than this, then I've got to head over to the tone curve, right? So if I want to see more information in my shadows, I'm going to switch. Now by default, sorry, this projector thing just went on and it sounds like it's going to levitate. Don't go anywhere. All right, so this tone curve is quite lovely. It has like little bumpers on it, so you can't go too far. So if you're used to the curve in Photoshop, what I'd suggest is you just go and click down in the lower right, and that will take you to the point curve. And the point curve is the one that you're familiar with, and it enables you to go to red, green, and blue channels independently of one another. So here, if I'm in RGB, then I'm making changes to all the channels, or all of the, the channels at one time, and I can go in there and just make a slight adjustment to my shadows. So you can always use the tone curve if you need to. Just be careful, because with the tone curve, most of the time I go and make selective or local adjustments instead, because the tone curve still only gives you one curve. And so as you increase the curve in one area, it's going to decrease the curve in another area. And as it decreases the curve in another area, it's going to flatten it out, and you're going to get flatter areas in your image. So just be very careful when you're using this. As soon as I go down too far here, we get those horrible flat areas. So I'll just bring that up a little bit, but you can add 16 points to the curve here, and we can go into RGB and we can change each one of these individually as well. So if I wanted to go in and let's say I need to lift the toe of the blues, we can go ahead and do that. And you can see I can add that blue into the image, add cyan into the shadows. In fact, this is a very useful tool if you're photographing and there is too much cyan in the shadows. Instead of pulling out the cyan using HSL, you could just move the toe of the curve over to the right, and you can see how much warmer my image gets by just that little bit of movement. If I did want to take out all the color here, then we can go to HSL. Sure enough, I can go to saturation, and I would recommend, it might be tempting to use the sliders here, but a lot of times you might not actually know what color you're trying to adjust. So, and I don't mean that in a negative way, it's just like, is that orange or is that red? And if you only move the red slider, you're going to be able to see if you print this large that you've desaturated your reds and you haven't done anything to those pixels that contained reds and oranges, especially if you've got like a beautiful sunset at night and you're just trying to maybe change the color a little bit. Just go in and use your targeted adjustment tool, because when I pick this up and I click in that same area, I'm having a hard time picking it up. There we go. And you click and you drag down. Look at, it's not actually red in there. Well, there is red, but it's also orange, and there's also a little bit of yellow there. And then I can come down here, and what I thought was green before is actually more yellow than it is green. And then we could go in here to hue, and I could come down and I could say, well, that kind of looks like a weird hue now, like it's too green. I don't want it to look like a sickly green. I want it to look a little bit more blue like that. And then we could go to saturation, and I could say, yeah, and I also, well, wait a minute. All right, well, that's a little crazy, but we'll leave the saturation of that aqua just the way it is. All right, and then if I wanted to come in and say, hey, but I don't want the blue in the sky, then I would go into my local adjustment, go ahead and decrease that saturation, and then just paint that out like that, okay? One word of caution with the profiles. We didn't talk too much about profiles, so let's go to this profile for a moment. This little guy right here, very cute. If we want more choice of profiles than just this, and your profile list will be different than mine, you can click on the profile browser, right? And that's going to bring up all your raw profiles that you can apply. They're Adobe raw, meaning that Adobe made them. Underneath that, you have your camera matching profiles. So if you're the type of person that on your camera, if you use the menus on the back to select a mode for your camera, like camera faithful or camera landscape or camera neutral, we make profiles that emulate that, so that if you look at the back of your camera when you've set it that way, and then you import your files into Lightroom, you can choose a camera matching profile. Again, yours will be different because we have to do this for each camera and then each camera manufacturer, and of course they all have different settings and everything. But you can choose from those if you prefer them. Now below that, you've got all your artistic profiles, which I did mention. There's one I really want to mention because it shows it very well. I was telling you, I believe it is Modern 8. Is that correct? Let's take a look. I'm going to close the profile browser for a moment, and I'm going to move my blacks over. Yep, look at this. I moved my black slider all the way over to the left, but do you notice that gap in the histogram right here? That's kind of weird, right? How come the blacks isn't letting me go all the way to black? It's the profile. So whoever made this profile, it was a conscientious decision. They said, no, the whole look of this profile means you can't have any blacks. That was the intent. So if you ever get stuck, no, we're not judging. We're just saying that's the intent of the profile, right? So if you ever get yourself in that situation, it could be the profile. Or if you're trying to like change the yellows in your image and you're like, wow, all my yellows look orange with this profile. That's the intent of the profile. A profile has a color lookup table in the profile, and it can remap colors, it can remap tones. It can say you can't have black blacks and you can't have white whites. You can make your own profiles if you want to. All you need to do is on my blog, which is just blogs.adobe.com/jkost. There's instructions there on how to make a profile. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but they are really cool if you've got something that you really want to shift colors, or if you've got a color you have to nail, or if you're trying to make two cameras look identical, you can create your own profiles. All right. So with our little sheep, I'm going to use that profile, that little Modern 8 profile. So here, I've got it selected. Now, back in the profile browser, any profile that you like, when you roll over it, it'll give you the little icon for the star. So you can just add that to your favorites. And then as soon as you've added it to your favorite, it'll show up in that list. So you don't have to continuously come to the browser. The artistic profiles also have an amount slider. So if I liked, for example, this artistic 3 profile, but I didn't want it applied too much, I can decrease or increase the amount, right? So it just kind of amplifies it. But this is something that is set in the profile. So the creator of the profile might say, nay, nay, you cannot adjust the amount of my profile. So if you find one like that where they don't allow it, when you move the amount slider, nothing will happen. So just know that it's not you. It was the creator of the profile that said, no, this is my profile. Take it or leave it, 100% or nothing. Okay? All right, so let's go back up to number 8. Tap return. That will also close the profile browser. Now let's hit auto just to kind of lighten that up a bit. Ooh, no good. Let's go up with shadows, down with highlights, but let's increase our exposure. How's that working over there? It's getting a little too bright, but okay. Let's zoom in. So before I was talking about the differences between this texture clarity and dehaze, right? So if I take the texture all the way over, we can see, in fact, let's compare that with sharpening. Let's go down to the detail panel. I'm going to take the sharpening all the way over. It's a really different look, right? Those are the finest details in your image. That's what sharpening affects. When I go to the radius, yes, it gets it a little bit thicker because this amount, which is way too much, but so you can see it, that amount is now being applied to a wider radius. When I decrease that, then it's going to be even smaller and tighter, okay? So if you're trying to sharpen, sharpening is still where you want to do that. For your more creative effects, we can come to basic and we can add this texture to your image. All right, so it is going to add a lot of contrast, but it brings out, wow, he looks so purple. I'm sorry about your nose in this image. Let's just decrease both of those quite a bit. Oh, now he just looks pasty dead almost, poor guy. It's hard to adjust here when you can't see what's going on there. All right, yeah, that's just not going to work for me so well. But we'll leave it there. All right, let's go ahead and bring the exposure up. Let's go ahead and bring the temperature up. That will warm him up and make him hopefully look a little bit happier there. All right, I can also go into the tone curve. I think I just mentioned this, right? So if I wanted to, we could go, let's go to RGB. Let's just bring this down a smidge and just keep those highlights up for a little contrast. Sorry, I think the screen, maybe with this screen I should do the opposite. What is this? I don't see that. Do you see a light swath, like almost a brightness coming from the base up this way? Yeah, I don't know what that is because it's not in my file. It's kind of weird. All right. Anyway, I'm going to go here to just my red real quick, and let's just bring some red down just to do a little more creative effect here. And then I'm just going to go to my greens maybe, and maybe we can just bring our greens up a smidge. That's too much of a smidge. A smidge should just be like that. Oh my gosh, I'm really afraid for what that's looking like over there. Because with these glasses, I can't really see it. So maybe we should just leave that alone. So let me show you how to reset your point curve. We can just double click on the point curve and it will reset all the values throughout all of the different RGB channels in here. All right, I'm just gonna leave that saturation as is. Can you see detail from where you're sitting up in here? Okay. All right, so let's just, sorry about that. When can you see detail? Okay, all right. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's move on. It's 1:33. Oh, quick, we have to move on. All right, I showed you the range masking. Did you all get the range masking? Did you get the concept? Yes, okay, terrific. All right, do any of you ever have to work with more than one image at a time? Yes, all right, so let's talk about that. So first of all, let's say I have this image, which is obviously taken, it's way too blue, and I want to make it look like this image right here, okay? Which is probably going to look really saturated now. But okay, so the point being I just want them to match. It's very difficult when I've got this image targeted to make it look like that image if I can't see that image. I've got this little teeny tiny thumbnail, I could bring it up, but still it's not going to be very big. I can hover over it, that gives me the navigator preview, but when I move my cursor it goes away. So we've got reference view. So if you just tap right here, the RA, or just tap R, it will give you reference view, and then you can just drag from your film strip in order to drag an image into reference view. Now some of you come in here and you have a lot of images selected at one time, so you should also know you can just right click if you had multiple images selected, and you could set that as your reference photo by choosing this from a right click instead of having to drag and drop it. But this is going to make it much easier because now I can see both of my images, right? So now as I start moving over my slider here, whoop, too much, we can make those two match. Right? So I probably want to bring that down a little bit and then maybe also just bring down the contrast a little bit. But you get the idea. You've got more than one image up so that you can compare them when they're next to each other. Now, if you work with images that are very similar, I'll just tap D to get out of reference view like this one, and you want to make changes to multiple images at one time, there's a number of different ways you can do that, right? So I can make changes to one image, I can copy and paste it, I can use the previous, and I can use auto sync. I can also create a preset if I think I want to use these same adjustments tomorrow or sometime down the road. It's totally up to you. But with this image, let's say I want to add a little bit of dehaze to it. It's probably going to push the whites too far, so let's bring those down. I don't know. I'm going to guess at that. Okay, so the point is I've made changes to one image, and now I want to make those same changes to the next image. Now, depending on how much control you want, you could just move to the next image, right? And then just hit previous. But the problem is, did you notice that the crop changed? So previous changes everything, and you don't have a choice as to what it changes. So what you might do is go back to the image that you made the changes to, and then hit copy. Right? So I can check all, I can check none, whatever you want. You could just apply, oh, I just want the dehaze, and you could just select that, or you could say, well, let's do everything except for the crop, hit copy, select the next image, and just do Command V in order to paste those settings. The copy and paste might be really handy if you've got like maybe 50 images that you're going through really quickly, and you have like maybe 2 settings that you want to apply, or maybe you just want to apply a vignette, but you don't want to apply it to every single image. So you could make that vignette change. So let's just come down here, and I'll just say, all right, well, on half of my images, but I don't know which ones, I probably want to add this vignette, right? So now I could say, hey, let's just copy that, check none, and then just copy the post-crop vignette. I'll hit copy, and then as I work along and I go to this image, and I'm like, oh, that could use a vignette, I'll tap V. I go to the next image, I'm like, no, that one doesn't need a vignette. I go to the next image. The vignette is still copied to your clipboard, so you can just do Command V and paste it in wherever you want it. So if you have something like that, as you move through your images, you can just copy to the clipboard and then paste it in. Okay, of course, the other way to work that's super efficient, but you just have to remember that you're doing it, is with auto sync. So with auto sync, I've got 3 images selected in my film strip, and I just click on this little switch right here for auto sync. Now, whatever change I make to one image, it's going to make it to all of the images, right? So I can come down here and maybe go to my tone curve, and I'm in RGB, so I'll just bring down my highlights there and bring this up. All right, this is just some dried mud here, and I just want to bring down, it really wasn't that bright. Let's bring down that value even more, but I still want to retain the information in my shadows. So whatever I'm doing now, I'm applying it to all of the selected layers, right? We could do something a little bit more obvious. I could go into split toning. We could take it to grayscale, right, by tapping the V key like we did before, and then I could add in some sepia. So maybe, well, I don't know what hue we want. Maybe I'll option click and go to hue, and then just drag this. I'm holding down the option key so that I get a preview of the hue in 100%, and I'll go somewhere around maybe 40, and then I'll just let go of the option key and then just dial up the amount of saturation. But if you want, and you had an image that had a lot of shadows, and maybe this isn't the best example, but a lot of times I notice when I add saturation, if I'm trying to do a sepia tone, it's going into the midtones too far. I want to keep it in the shadow areas, so I've got to use my balance slider and scoot that up. But we don't have a lot of shadows here with detail, so it might not be as obvious as maybe if I go to the horse image instead. Right, so if I go here and I go basic and we just say, let's do a little auto, and I tap the V key, maybe we even go to black and white and I hit auto here just to get the auto conversion to black and white. This time now, when I go to split toning, we'll see when I tap the Option key and drag in, we can see that color a lot better. Drag in the amount of saturation. I want a lot of color in my shadows, but not in the midtones, so as I use the balance slider, you can see it's disappearing in the midtones, but I still have a lot of color in the shadows. All right, so back here though, with these 3 images selected, I just was trying to show you that all 3 of them were actually changing. So I guess I could just go to tone curve and we could, ooh, well that's terrible, that's, ooh, well that's kind of interesting. Huh. All right, no, what I was gonna do is just change the, goodness gracious, I was gonna change the curve here. Let's double click to reset it. I was just gonna grab that point and drag it down and drag this point and drag it up so that we can see I can get the inverse really quickly, but my point really is that we've changed all 3 of the images because auto select is on. The thing to be careful of is you will now return to the grid view, be doing something else for 10 minutes, have all of your film strip images selected, come into the Develop module, and forget that auto is turned on. So you just have to be conscientious of it because otherwise it will change everything in your film strip. That's what it's designed to do. Okay. A few things that I didn't mention. If we go back to this image that we had some selective, okay, how about this guy right here? So we've got our selective adjustments on this one, and we go and we grab our brush, and let's make one of these active. So we can see, obviously by tapping the O key, we can see the overlay. But if we decide, like if you come back tomorrow and you're like, wow, that pen is just, I just overdid it. But the pen has 2 things applied to it. It's got the exposure applied to it, and it's got saturation applied to it. And I just kind of want to back off a little bit, but I don't want to have to calculate all the changes I would have to make to all the different sliders. This little disclosure triangle right here, this little guy, if you click on that, it will close up that panel. And then there's that amount slider. And as you drag the amount to the left, it will move all of those sliders in tandem so that, well, let me show you. If I go to like 50% here and I drop this down, now they've both been moved in, but it's not like they're both going 50%. It's 50% of whatever that slider was. All right, so I'm gonna go back to the amount slider here for just a second, and we can bring that all the way back up. And it looks like I actually had the amount slider set before, so let's bring that down to maybe there, so you guys aren't blinded. Okay. Ooh, spots. I'm sure you guys never have spots in your images, but every once in a while I do. Let's scroll over here. So do you guys know about visualize spots? If I select this image right here and we just zoom in a little bit, look at all those little spots. If you were going to print this, there's nothing worse than spending a lot of money for a print and then coming back and being like, oh, I can't believe I had all those spots in there that I didn't see. So if you tap the A key will toggle on the visualize spots. It's basically thresholding your image. So now you can back off on that or just introduce however much, you know, it just depends on the image and where you're looking at the areas to see the spots. So as long as you see any round spots like that, now you can much more quickly go through and eliminate all of those little spots. And the spots can synchronize. So when you do a little copy and paste, you can go ahead and copy and paste the spot healing as well. So that works very well if you actually have spots. If you're going in and using this tool for retouching, then you'll probably have to go in and retouch each image because your portrait's going to move and things like that. So I'll tap the A key again just to remove that, and we'll scoot back. And then just one last thing before we wrap up, because it's 1:42 and I only have 3 minutes. I'm going to show you 5 quick things. We're going to go to the Develop module, to the grid view. So just so you know, when you go to the Develop module and you move those sliders, all of those sliders are absolute. But there might be times when you go, gosh, all of those images are a third of a stop too bright. But you've already gone in the Develop module, and each one has a different setting. So one might be 0.5, 0.25, negative 0.3. If you're in the Develop module and you've got images that have different exposure settings, and you select them all and say sync, it's going to move them all to the exact numeric value. But if you're here in the grid view and you have 3 images selected and you go to Quick Develop and you just want to increase the exposure of all of them, maybe a third of a stop, clicking here just adds a third of a stop to each image. So it's a relative adjustment, not an absolute adjustment. So it's a great way if you've had a long night of editing, the next day you come back and you're like, wow, they're just all underexposed a bit or overexposed a bit. Come in here and you've got access to your exposure, your contrast, your highlights, your shadows, all sorts of different options in here. The other thing that I see all the time, just real quick here, is this happens. So you're in a collection, right? And you grab an image and then you want to put this image at the beginning of the collection. So you're like, you have to drag it and then, oh, no, oh, right, no. Oh, and like 10 minutes later, you're still dragging, go. Please don't do that anymore. Please don't do that. Select the image. Like if I want to move this one to the top, select it, go to the top, hold down the Command key so that you're selecting 2 images. That other image is still selected, right? If I tap the N key and go to survey mode, they're both selected. Go back to grid view. I'm at the top. Just drag a little to the right till you get the horizontal line, vertical line, and drop. And it will move it. Yes, I know. See, because you waited, I know, I'm sorry. Because I've seen people scroll for days. They're like, I'm late for dinner, I'm still scrolling. All right? We talked about snapshots, we talked about all those things. Oh, the other thing I have to tell you about is the Painter tool, because so many people don't know about this, and I know I'm digressing, but I have 30 seconds left. Painter tool, make a collection, create a collection. Yes, we'll just call it collection. Don't put it in anywhere, don't sync it. I'm gonna set it as my target collection, because then look at this, how easy is this? I have a zillion collections, what's it called, collection. See right there, it's got the plus icon. So what I don't want to have to do is continuously come up here and be like, oh, I need to go to a folder in 2016. Let's go to that folder. Let's go to Australia. Oh, let's scroll down. Okay, I want to add an image to that collection. Okay, so now I have to scroll down to see the collection, right? And then you're like, okay, great. So there's my collection. There's my one image. Whew. All right, now I got to go to another folder. So you got to race up here. You come up here and you're, now I got to scroll down here. Okay, I want to add that. Oh, wait, now I got to scroll back up here. Where's my collection? Let's get that visible. Okay, now let's drag that. Whew. Oh my gosh, what a nightmare. Grab your Painter tool, set it to your target collection, and then just scroll through and be like, ooh, I like that one. Pew. And just make that noise. Pew. And then make that noise. Oh, Wile E. Coyote. Pew. And then wait, ooh, all of them. Look at it. It's almost impossible to see them. And go, whoosh, like a can of spray paint, all of them added to the collection. Watch the collection grow. Right? I don't have to drag and drop. I don't have to do anything. Love it, want it. Keep going. Add that one, add that one. I'm up to 13, and I never had to drag and drop anything. I just had to use the Painter tool. It's not only for target collection. You can add keywords, labels, flags, ratings, metadata settings, all sorts of stuff there. So you guys, I don't want to go over time, and it is time. So I'm really, really appreciative that you came today. I hope you learned something. I'm going to leave with by putting up this blogs.adobe.com/jkost. All of my information is up there. There's like 2,000 blogs on Lightroom and Photoshop. There's getting started blogs. There's new feature blogs, all sorts of stuff. And so all of it's for free. So I hope you'll make use of that blog. And also, voila, if you will please fill out your survey. That would be much appreciated. I hope you guys had a great time and enjoy the rest of Max.